The South African Health Products Regulatory Authority has now approved an innovative, locally developed COVID-19 antigen detection kit. This development by Medical Diagnostic is set to boost the fight against the pandemic. The Medical Diagnostic CEO, Ashley Ace, spoke to Newzroom Afrika regarding the procedures taken before it was approved by SAHPRA.
Of course, we had to conduct clinical trials first. We done this in Cape Town, and afterwards we had to submit our test kits to the National Reference Laboratory. Over there, they tested it against an array of panels, and it had to pass a certain specification to be able to get SAHPRA approval. And hence, we met the specification of 100% specificity and 90% sensitivity. Basically, an antigen test detects the proteins to the virus and not the genetic material. So what happens is we target different proteins to the virus. We, in particular, target the N protein, the nuclear protein, and then you get what you call the spike protein. We know that with mutations, the spike protein region was affected more than the nuclear protein region, and hence we targeted that region. An antigen kit is good to know, to have if you have symptoms. You don't have it's flu, you don't have it's a cold. So once you test yourself and you're positive on the test, then you know you have COVID. And it's best to isolate that time, of course. And of course, that will assist in fighting the spread.
He also says the kits are not yet regulated for use at home.
Yes, it is, but it's still regulated to professional use. We are awaiting approval of home kits. So the home kit itself must, of course, be user-friendly. You can't sell it with kit components. We are designing a device that has everything built in it. And also, we expect it to be ready by March next year. We're waiting on the regulator to also let us know when home kits will be allowed. But we want to release it with a software app to remove any subjectivity when it comes to result interpretation. So the app itself will assist in analyzing the results, and then also, of course, for data mining purposes within the POPI Act regulations.
So one of the biggest developments we've seen over the last 18 months is how important vaccines are. Let me ask you a question. I'll bet you 2 years ago you did not think you'd be queuing up to get another vaccine as an adult. And yet here we are. Crucial to this is whether we can produce our own vaccines. We've seen the situation with the Aspen pharmacare factory in Gqeberha, but there are now other hubs, MRNA hubs, being developed as well. Professor David Walwyn at the University of Pretoria, he's been looking at this and working on this, I should say. Professor, good afternoon to you. We can all see why it's important to produce our own vaccines here. There's now a technology transfer hub. It involves the letters M, R, N, and A. How's this all going to work?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Thank you so much for having me on the program. So you're talking about the messenger RNA. It's not RN and A, but I mean, that's, it's the messenger RNA is just a form of ribonucleic acid. It's a long-chain polymer, and essentially it's a novel type of vaccine that has certain advantages over the existing vaccine technologies or the historical vaccine technologies. And it's, I mean, this is something that's been developed over the last 2 or 3 years, although it has its roots in a development going back much longer than that. But certainly these approved messenger RNA vaccines are new on the market.
So when we talk about a technology transfer hub, is it as simple as flying equipment over to South Africa, or is it a lot more complicated than that?
I think some people would wish that it was as simple as flying equipment over. So there is an option of flying equipment over for messenger RNA vaccines, and this is what Rwanda and Senegal have been offered by BioNTech. So BioNTech has been working closely with Pfizer, but they retained the licenses to their intellectual property for certain countries, and so they were able then to offer Rwanda and Senegal these flyover. Basically, it's a containerized version of the manufacturing technology. So they would install these containers, if you like, in Rwanda and Senegal, which are able to manufacture small quantities of the messenger RNA vaccine. I mean, one of the important things to understand is that one needs very small quantities of messenger RNA to vaccinate millions of people. So I think to vaccinate the whole of Africa, one needs less than 30 or 40 kilograms of messenger RNA vaccine. So it's possible then to to do the fly over the technology option. But South Africa hasn't yet been offered that technology in the containerized version. And so the Technology Transfer Hub is still seeking messenger RNA technology in order to then roll that out and do its own manufacturing in the Technology Transfer Hub.
I mean, I presume it's still better to do it, well, that way, or to have our own capacity. Is that going to be quite hard to develop then if we don't get offered this?
I think it is much better. It's much quicker, certainly. I mean, Rwanda are able to get up started very quickly compared to how long it's going to take us to reproduce that manufacturing technology. So there's a lot of expertise in the messenger RNA, not just a question of how you make messenger RNA, but it's also a question of how you make these tiny particles, the nanoparticles that are then used to transport the messenger RNA into cells. And so that technology, which requires the use of lipophilic structures, it's not freely available, and to reproduce that will take some time. So yes, the quickest route would be to be able to license and bring in the technology in the form of a containerized version. It's going to take us a lot longer to try and reproduce that in our own facility in Cape Town.
So how do you expect this is going to now play out? Are we going to have to wait quite a while before we get the access that Rwanda has?
I mean, I think that's still difficult to answer. It depends on some lucky breaks. I mean, it's very possible that Moderna will strike a deal with the messenger RNA hub. There's talk about companies licensing the hub with the proprietary technology. But that's very different from actually bringing over a containerized manufacturing facility and simply installing it. So reproducing that can take 2 or 3 years. It does take a long time depending on how many problems one encounters in the commissioning of local manufacturing facilities.
I mean, we've sort of forgotten how important it is to produce vaccines in South Africa. I mean, over the years, we sort of lost that capacity, and I don't think we were the only country to do it. There's a sort of rough economics to vaccines, because up until COVID, you know, anyone producing them would make just a few cents per dose because they were so cheap to make, and in the end, many people started to get them, I suppose, from the Serum Institute in India. This is a real reminder of how you must never take your eye off the ball. It's not about economics, it's about lives.
Exactly. It's about resilience and health security, and that's precisely the issue. And that was what motivated the establishment of the public-private partnership in 2001, when a few people recognized the fact that we would continue to need this vaccine manufacturing capacity in the country. Unfortunately, we were swimming against the current at the time, and in some ways continue to swim against the current. There's still people who feel that localization of health manufacturing isn't something which we need to do in the country.
Do you think that's going to change now, or do you think it's still going to be quite difficult? I mean, there are going to be some people who are going to say, this is a once-off pandemic, and the likelihood it really isn't.
I think the longer it continues, the greater the number of people that will be convinced. I mean, every day that we lose through constrained economic activity as a consequence of a pandemic is money. And so politicians are going to be much more receptive to the concept of localization of vaccine manufacturing. So perhaps this is now the moment, if you like, that people who've been singing this song for 20 years, since 2001, this is their moment that their arguments will be validated, will be proven, and we will actually make that national investment that's necessary, if you like, in the manufacture of active substances for vaccines.
Professor David Walwyn, thanks very much indeed at the University of Pretoria. An important conversation. Really appreciate the time.